All right, everyone, and welcome to our weekly political update here on Atlanta News First Plus. Thank you for joining us on what obviously was a largely historic week here in Georgia and in Fulton County specifically. We saw the indictment of quite a number of people, 19 defendants, but most notably, former President Donald Trump is now facing his fourth round of indictment since leaving office. 4 indictments in 5 months, and we have our very own case right here in Fulton County to talk about. So that's what we're going to be spending the bulk of today going over. That indictment came out on Monday night. It was a bit of a surprise to us. We thought perhaps maybe that this would happen on Tuesday. In fact, that's almost what we were told and hinted at by the prosecutor's office, the DA's office here in Fulton County, telling us that they would give us some heads up. But all of a sudden on Monday, we started to see witnesses that were scheduled to testify before a grand jury on Tuesday arrive at the courthouse. People like former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, who has testified before that grand jury because he was serving in office at the time during 2020 when some of these alleged attempts to meddle in the election were going on. People like George Cheedy, who is an independent journalist who just happened to walk into a meeting of accused fake electors who were trying to cast electoral votes for Trump to give him the win here in Georgia. Of course, he had lost at that point already to now President Joe Biden, but he showed up on Monday to testify, and we were talking to him a little bit, and he was saying that things were really hurtling towards a resolution on this on Monday, and so this happened a little earlier than we thought, and so now we're kind of in the throes of this. We know that there were over 40 charges, 41 charges against these 19 defendants, many of them felony charges, and of course a good bulk of them faced by former President Donald Trump for things like conspiring to influence state leaders, conspiring to meddle in Georgia's 2020 election. Of course, we know this all really stemmed from that infamous phone call now that he had placed to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger asking him to, quote, find 11,780 votes, which would have been the exact number he would have needed to top Joe Biden's vote count here in Georgia by 1 vote. And so that really got people skeptical of the motives of him and some of his allies here in Georgia. It got the DA, Fani Willis, looking into this case, and of course now 2.5 years later, here we are with over 41 counts against 19 different people. Some of those people are high-profile names that some of our viewers might recognize. Former New York Mayor and Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani is one of them. Former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows is another one. Of course, he spent many years in the Trump administration. He was there on January 6th when the attack on the Capitol took place. And some other big names, too, like Sidney Powell, another attorney for Trump, who was kind of doing some of the work of trying to question the election results in places like Georgia and places like Michigan, Arizona. And so here we are now with, after 2.5 years of waiting, some sort of resolution to what we had all expected was to be a large indictment. That's what we got. So moving forward, there are a couple of things we need to note on how this is all going to play out. So we had a press conference on Monday night, very late in the night, about 11:30 was when we attended that press conference hosted by District Attorney Fani Willis, who brought these indictments. She said during that press conference that these charges were not political. She said, we do things here in this office based on the law and the facts. Of course, a lot of people had questions about these and the timing of these, given that it took 2.5 years to investigate, and now these charges are coming right on the cusp and the precipice of an election cycle in which former President Donald Trump is the main GOP front-running candidate. And so she assured us that these charges were not political. She was prosecuting based on the facts and the law. So as for what happens now, you can just expect this to be treated like any other case that would be prosecuted here in Fulton County. So what that means is, and it is a bit surreal to say, but people like former President Trump, Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, Mark Meadows, all these high-profile names now have warrants out for their arrest. We shouldn't forget to mention, too, that former state GOP chair David Schaefer is also one of those people charged. He was also a former state lawmaker. So there are a lot of high-profile players named in these indictments who are now essentially under mandate to report to Fulton County by August 25th. That's next Friday. That was when Willis said these folks had to be here in Fulton County in person. There are no workarounds for this. They're treating them like any other defendant here in a case out of Fulton County. And so Willis said they have until noon on August 25th, next Friday, to be here in Fulton County to turn themselves in. They will be booked They will be processed at the Rice Street Fulton County Jail. And we actually heard from Sheriff Pat Labat a couple of weeks ago, and he said, again, we're going to treat this like any other case that we would here in Fulton County. We're going to take their mugshots. So we will have 19 mugshots of some of these really high-profile individuals, including former President Donald Trump. If they don't arrive here in Fulton County to turn themselves over to authorities and surrender peacefully, they will become fugitives of the law. Again, it is very surreal to say that, but that is the facts of the case here. And Willis is currently in the process of negotiating these peaceful surrenders with each of their attorneys. And so that is something that has to be done separately. It's going to take a little bit of logistical tap dancing on their end to coordinate with all 19 of these individuals' lawyers to figure out how they're going to get themselves here. And already, since that happened on Monday, we've had quite a bit of development in these cases. Just yesterday, former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who was a huge player in the Trump administration, especially in the latter years of it, after he came on, replacing his old Chief of Staff, has already requested a change of venue. He is asking for this to be moved now to federal court. Just to give you some background on this, this was to be tried in county court and district court, of which, of course, Fani Willis is the main prosecutor. She's the district attorney. This was to be prosecuted in district court, Superior Court to be more specific, here in Fulton County, and a change of venue would mean a couple of different things. It is within these defendants' rights to ask for a change of venue, to ask for this to be moved to federal court. It would mean a couple of things as we understand it. We know, and perhaps the main point of doing that in the first place was to widen the jury pool. We think about how you pick a jury for things like this, especially high-profile nature cases, where you have people who are always familiar with, there isn't any American alive today who doesn't know who Donald Trump is. So the question for prosecutors is, how do you pick a fair jury? Question for defendants' lawyers is, how do you pick a fair jury? And so if you were to move this to federal court out of Fulton County, out of the district, you would no longer be just selecting a jury pool from Fulton County, which of course is a very blue county. It was the highest percentage of votes for any county that Joe Biden had his votes concentrated in 2020. So they are a heavily blue county here in Fulton. And so moving this to federal court would open it up to the entire northern district of Georgia. And so you would be talking a handful of counties, many, many different towns, and of course many, many different backgrounds of people who live there who would be able to be potential jurors for this case. The other thing that this could very well mean is we know that in federal court there are no cameras allowed, and so that is something that we would have to keep an eye on, as well as potentially having the ability to have these people be pardoned at some point, because Georgia, you are not allowed to pardon. The governor is not allowed to pardon. We have a board here that is elected, and they serve for almost a decade long term, and so that would be something we would have to watch out for too. Now, I want to bring you down to Coffee County. That was an area that was mentioned quite a few times throughout the indictment. It was an area where some of these Trump aides and allies had sent folks to go and try to essentially hack into voting machines down there, Dominion voting machines, under the guise that there was some sort of rigging that had gone on with these machines to give Joe Biden more votes than former President Trump. And so there are actually 4 individuals named in this indictment having to do with what happened down there in Coffee County in the immediate aftermath. In fact, the day after the January 6th attack on the Capitol, Sidney Powell, the attorney for former President Trump, is one of them. A false elector, Kathy Latham, is a second. Coffee County election supervisor, Misty Hampton, and bail bondsman Scott Hall, who is also a Trump ally here in Georgia, are all facing charges for their attempts to get into election machines and try to essentially see and save that data from those machines in the days after the January 6th attack. And so our Rachel Aragon actually went down yesterday to Coffee County to try to see how folks were feeling there, scope out the scene a little bit. Her report was fantastic. It really captured how people are feeling down there, be that this is so close to the investigation. And so we want to let you see her story now.
In Coffee County, 200 miles southeast of Atlanta, where a grand jury indicted former President Donald Trump.
They're just really reaching and just trying to find stuff right now.
Talks of alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 election results in Georgia isn't on the top of everyone's mind. Several people involved in the reported voting system breach in Coffee County are among the 19 defendants facing charges. That includes former election supervisor for Coffee County, Misty Hampton, and former Trump attorney Sidney Powell. She's accused of arranging for a computer forensics team to travel to Coffee County to copy data from elections equipment.
It's unreal, really, what's happening right now.
The sweeping indictment coming out of Fulton County Monday having no impact on Dennis Stevens, who's lived in Coffee County his entire life. He said he voted for Trump in 2020 and plans to do the same next year.
We want to see a great nation. That's what we want. Our town, we want our state and the nation to be great. And it's the folks up there in the north don't want that.
In 2020, Donald Trump won nearly 70% of the vote in Coffee County.
After January 6th, I couldn't vote for him after that.
Franklin Hayes says right now he's not sure who he's voting for in 2024.
I like to see Biden out the door, truthfully, and I like to see Trump out the door. I would take Brian Kemp over than Trump.
But after Monday's indictment, he feels
If they're going to do that Trump, which I go ahead and great, but let's do Biden's son to them too.